Some people walk into a room and you instantly feel them. Not because they're louder, not because they're trying harder, but because they're internally coherent. And that makes more of a difference than you think. In this masterclass, I will share with you ways to present yourself with clarity to other people and make yourself the most magnetic possible version of yourself. And that comes with 5 main steps. First of all, you need to master self-perception. Self-perception is the version of you that you believe in. If you constantly over-explain, if you constantly hesitate, if you're constantly anxious, people will feel it. And that's where that perception comes in. Because your self-concept is the core of how everybody is going to see you. Because the way others react to you is simply a mirror of the way you see yourself. If you don't think you're worthy of being in a room, if you don't think you're worthy of being listened to, it translates into your body language, into the way you speak, and people are going to feel that, and they are going to push boundaries because they are not here to be nice. They are here to get the most out of this social interaction, and they're willing to do anything to do it. In the end, it all comes down to your inner narrative. The things you always tell yourself when something comes up. Do you bring yourself down or do you hype yourself up? Do you let problems overpower you? Or do you actually try to find solutions to get to where you want because you know you deserve it? And you know there's no other way than success for you. People can tell from the way you speak, how you relate to what you're saying. If you start a sentence with, "This might sound stupid, but," or "I'm probably wrong, but," that is going to frame the way the person is going to listen to what you have to say afterwards. If you start your sentence like that, the person is not going to value what you're saying. Communication is so important that you need to be able to naturally, through practice, get those starters, get those sentences right in your mind, that clarity. So instead of saying, "This might sound stupid, but," say, "I think, I believe, we should look at it this way." Be more affirmed about your opinion. You don't have to yell, you don't have to be loud to be heard if you're a more quiet person. But be always confident about what you say to the world. And I used to be that way. I used to be more quiet, not really express my opinion firmly because I didn't believe it mattered or I didn't want to seem too pushy. But then I realized in group projects, for instance, that if someone didn't give those ideas, then they would never be put out there and the project will never turn out to be as great as it could have. And you realize by working in those projects that no one wants to be the leader, no one wants to step on other people's toes. And if that's a situation that you experience, you have to be the one to do the hard thing. You have to be the one to say firmly but respectfully, "We are going to do it this way because we don't have much time and we need to get this project done." And I took that role and I affirmed my opinion and I was absolutely open to listen to objections and external opinions. But I did not shrink myself because I had my ideas and I wanted to share them so we could move forward. I didn't stay the quiet one, and it might have just been a silly group project, but it translates to every interaction. Once I learned this, I didn't accept to be put down in social situations. I didn't accept to have other people talk over me or have them diminish my opinions. Because if you let people do that, then in their brain, that's acceptable when it comes to you. I could see that difference in some situations that I've been in. I could see how people would treat me once I set my boundaries and how they would treat someone who didn't have boundaries. They defaulted to that reaction because they knew that I wouldn't accept any less. So they had to respect me. And the other person never set those boundaries, so they could just diminish their opinion because there was no consequence. And that is the reflection you need to have in order to start this process. Now let's move on to chapter 2. Observing your environment. This is really the key to emotional interactions, but people often have a lot of misconceptions about what observing your environment really means. A lot of people see this as a manipulative behavior or something that's really unnatural, but truly it's been going on for thousands of years. People have always observed others in social settings because that was the rule. That was the way to know how the other person was going to behave. Because if you do not observe, then you are constantly emotionally reacting. Because if you can observe, then you can prepare. You can be ahead of where the conversation is going. You can be ahead of what the atmosphere is like. And it doesn't mean that you should not be present. Absolutely not. But it can actually help you be more present if you can actually read the cues of the other person. Now, everybody is talking about body cues, but it is truly the core of social interactions. When you get to know someone, when you're in a social setting, you don't really know how to act. We all know about closed off positions. When you say something to someone and they tend to move their body inward and be more closed off to what you just said, you can tell that it's either something they don't like because they feel exposed and they're trying to protect themselves, or they're simply not enjoying where the conversation is going. And this is the cue. It's not just looking at someone and saying, oh, they don't like me because they're closed off. It could be about something else. What matters is their reaction to what you say. It's the movement. It's not the initial positioning. Because my goal is to teach you to become so magnetic through your authenticity that when you walk into a room, the people who know you light up when they see you because they know that the interaction is going to be interesting, that they know that it's going to bring out good feelings to them, because that says a lot about someone. So being able to observe and anticipate the way someone is going to behave and is going to say is actually very important. In the book, The 48 Laws of Power, there is a lot that the author says about power dynamics, especially in the first law, which is never outshine the master. And this might sound extremely conceptual and so far-fetched, but it is extremely actual. And it is pretty recurrent in a lot of situations. If you're getting a job interview, that is one of those moments where you have to be aware of the power dynamic and you have to be able to observe a lot of things about the person, because observation is what is going to reveal what the other person expects from you and what they're actually looking for. Because if you're so focused on yourself in that interaction, then you cannot see what they want, what they expect, what they're looking for, or if they even like you in the moment, because you are trying to perform. Whereas if you're letting them ask their questions, if you're looking where they're leading you, then you can go there with them and you can find each other in a mutual, and you can meet each other halfway, because that is what the interaction is about. It's not for you to expose your competence to them. It's to be able to see what you can bring to them and what they can bring to you. So going back to the power dynamic, you have to be aware that in this scenario, the person who is going to hire you is the one that has the power because they have what you want, but you also have something they want. So while you should respect that and not think that you're entitled to anything, you should also play your cards right and know that you have something that they want, and that's what you should put forward. And that is what you get from being really good at observing your environment and other people. Because knowing what somebody wants is the most powerful thing you can have. And I don't mean that, once again, in a negative way, because a lot of people think that's a way to use a weakness against them or something. No, that can help you get a greater bond because you know what they need, you know what they want. So that way, the connection can be deeper because you understand the person. Understanding is really the core of that interaction, and that is what makes people enjoy speaking with you. That's what makes them open up. That's what gets them to want to be around you. That's what makes you magnetic. If you're constantly focused on what you want, if you're constantly focused on what you're looking like in that social setting, first of all, you're overthinking. So you might not look as effortless and you're constantly trying to outshine other people. Well, that is felt. And you're not focusing on other people. And people like when the focus is on them. And it's actually the safest bet you can have, to focus on the other person, to ask things about them. Because that can create a deeper bond. And it also gives them the opportunity to bounce back, to show you where they want to go with the conversation. Instead of just having to listen to you about something they don't even want to talk about, and they're probably going to forget about. An interaction is not a way to one-up one another. It's a way to share something. And sharing doesn't come only from sharing experiences. It comes from sharing a connection and a mutual interest. I also want to talk a little bit about authority bias, because this concept is extremely central in a lot of social interactions, knowing where the authority is, because that is where people are going to tend to lean towards. People feel safe in the presence of authority, whether it's a renowned doctor, whether it's someone who has a lot of experience in a field, or even someone who is just confident. Confidence actually moves mountains and crowds and can pretty much make people do anything, because people see the confidence they associate with authority. They think, oh, this person knows what they're talking about, I'm going to listen to that person. So you can use that to your advantage while still being fair. Being a good leader comes from knowing what the people who are going to follow you need and what you can bring to them. So maybe the reason why people don't tend to listen to you much, people talk over you, people don't value your ideas, first of all, it's because you might not have set boundaries, but it's also because you do not inspire authority. And of course, a lot of people associate authority with fear. And I don't really like using that word because, well, I don't think people should be afraid of you. I do think that fear should be associated with consequence. Consequence if the boundary is not respected. Because if there is no consequence, then the person can just go as far as they want. Because magnetic people command the room through that quiet authority. Even people who've never met them can tell, because there is something effortless about them. And that links back to the self-perception I was talking about before. They don't see themselves as better than someone. They don't see a competition. They don't feel like they have to prove themselves. They're just there to have a good time to meet new people, to have good interactions. And that is what people find so frustrating about those people, is that they're not even trying. But that's exactly the point. They have worked so much on their own identity, the way they perceive themselves, their own self-concept, their own inner narrative, that they know who they are. And they're fine with showing that to other people. And they're okay with simply observing the room, because they don't have to overly criticize themselves. You can only read the room properly if you move the scope from yourself to the outside, because then you'll notice the truth, which is people are not even really looking at you. People are not even really paying attention. If you embarrass yourself, half of the people won't notice, half of the people will, and they'll forget about it the next day. So move that attention outward for a change, because that feels much safer than constantly looking at your own actions and constantly judging your own words. Now let's move on to chapter number 3, clarity. I talked about the identity narrative, but it needs to be clear in your mind. And it needs to be clear in the other person's mind when you interact with them. Because it's one thing to want to have an interaction with someone and feeling confident about it if you don't curate how you're coming across. And that might sound pretty self-centered, but that is work you have to do. You can't just be all over the place and just pop up as you are to whoever and not even thinking twice about the person you have in front of you. Because the clarity you have towards a friend is not the clarity that will be understood by an employer, for example. You are a complex person. We all are extremely complex. And we have a lot of aspects in our lives, and we do not act the same way with all the different people we have interactions with. And that is completely normal. But we have to be able to be clear in our interactions with different people. You need clarity in the way you speak, in your boundaries, in your intentions. If you're going for a job interview, you have to be clear about who you are, what jobs you've done, what your resume is about. You have to be clear about your intentions. What can I do for the company? What is my goal here? What can I bring to you? And your boundaries. When something comes up, am I being disrespected? Is something wrong? Are we having trouble with other coworkers or whatever it is? You are going to interact with those people in a very specific way, but it always needs to hold that clarity. And it's the same issue with a friend. When you go up to a friend, when you talk to them, you have to speak clearly to them. Let's say you're having a difficult conversation. You know who they are. You've spent a lot of time together. You know how they operate. You know about their traumas. So you know what is going to hurt them. You know how you should approach the conversation. You can tell them about your boundaries, which are not going to be the same ones you discussed with your boss. And it is that clarity that will give you that lane to follow. And it makes those interactions much deeper, much more efficient, much more enjoyable, because you don't have that stress of figuring out how can I come across in the right way. I don't even know how to talk to this person. All you need is to understand them. And that is where that magnetism comes from. It's the clarity. Confusing people are not attractive because there's so much friction in understanding. Once again, humans dislike friction in their interactions, in their life, in their habits. So a clear person is going to go straight to the point, but they master who they are. They master their perceptions, the conversation so well that this clarity, that honesty just lands so softly, kind of like a feather. It doesn't come off as brutal because they know who they're speaking to. And the goal is never to be brutal. It's to have that kind of honesty that makes the person feel understood, and not adding just random words to appease the tension when you're actually just adding more confusion to the conversation. I'd like to act out 2 little different scenarios for you to understand this better. Scenario number 1. You're at a party with someone at work, and they come up to you and they ask, "How was your weekend?" And you say, "Oh, it was good. I didn't do much. I was with a friend. I was with my family. I was out of town, but I know there could have been an emergency because we're working with a really important client. So I still worked a little bit, but I didn't overwork because I know that's like I still rested. I'm still present with my family, but I still worked, because we had that big project on Tuesday. And I had a good weekend, and then I took my cat to the vet." Yeah, that created a lot of confusion in the other person's mind that thought this person is all over the place. And it's not about having rehearsed the entire conversation. You don't have to rehearse. That is what people don't understand. You don't have to think out every scenario in your mind before it happens. That's gonna literally drive you crazy. What you should do kind of looks something like this. "So how was your weekend?" "It was good. I was out of town with my family. I stayed in a little later on Friday to work on that project we have to do, so I could really be present." That's clear. And you didn't have to rehearse it because you took the time. You don't have to answer right away. And you don't have to overshare. You don't have to prove that you're hardworking. You don't have to prove that you're present with your family by giving this whole monologue, because truly the person doesn't really care. So really try to measure your words like that and make sure your delivery is clear, because once again, it's all about clarity. Which leads us to chapter number 4, speaking intentionally. So we all know that communication really shapes perception. And we talked about it before in the chapter about observing your environment and the other person's body cues and verbal cues. But now let's talk about how your communication can make the interaction more interesting. It's really all about pace and pauses and emotional regulation. So really keep a pace when you're getting to know someone. You don't have to rush, you don't have to overshare, you don't have to constantly have the right thing to say. Sometimes you don't really know the person yet, so the interaction is a bit uncomfortable, you don't really know what to talk about. Give yourself time to find more topics to talk about. People usually have this misconception that first interactions have to be this big roller coaster and have all those amazing things to talk about, and it feels super smooth and it's like you've known each other for years. But in reality, you don't know the person, so it's normal that it feels uncomfortable at times because you haven't regulated each other yet. You're not on the same wavelength because you've never met. So ways to make it more natural is to pause, to take time to think, to ask follow-up questions, and to keep eye contact without making it too intense, but it changes everything. I've seen recently a lot of people on dates spend 90% of the dinner on their phone or talking with their phone in hand. They were basically not looking at the person in front of them. As someone who's experienced this, I was really clear about that boundary, by the way. But the first time I experienced it, I was like, well, you're clearly not listening to me, because the eyes show where your focus is, period. You cannot be actively doing something else and still actively listen to the other person. And even if you can't do that, well, it feels pretty disrespectful not to have someone look at you when you're talking. So keep that in mind. Everybody talks about eye contact, but it is an actual skill to master. And when someone actually keeps eye contact, it changes the game. So I've talked about clarity, but I want to now speak more about authenticity, because speaking more intentionally also comes from being more authentic to you. Speaking about things that make sense to you, that excite you, and not constantly trying to control the other person's perception of you. Because anxious people and insecure people will censor themselves, will say less, because they're afraid of the other person's perception and they're trying to micromanage the way the other person is going to react. But you cannot have a meaningful conversation if the words that came out of the person's mouth were curated by you. Because we've all done it. We've all minimized an opinion, we've all agreed, just the other person will be like, yeah, I agree with that. Those words were curated by you, not them. And we don't like to admit that. But letting your opinion and experiences and the other person's coexist and still be able to talk about it and discuss it respectfully, that is what a real conversation is like. It's not trying to dim your light so that there's no friction, because that is not intentional. That is speaking for pretense. That is not speaking with intention. Speaking intentionally requires for you to be honest with yourself, maybe to speak less and pause more and listen more actively to the other person and not try to put on a show just to impress them. And I completely get that. There are people that we meet and we have all those interesting things to talk about and we want them to admire us. And you can absolutely do that. You can share your accomplishments and your friends and family should absolutely support you. But it shouldn't be a complete monologue about all your great accomplishments. You can absolutely do something like talk about your own accomplishments, ask a follow-up question for the person to talk about theirs. That is completely something you can do. That is speaking intentionally, because you are saying something true and authentic to you that brings you and the other person closer, but then you're asking a follow-up question, so that strengthens the bond and the person feels appreciated and they get to talk about themselves, which is a plus, because who doesn't? So there you have it. It is not that difficult. All it takes is a little more awareness. And then finally, chapter number 5, action and repetition. Of course, I was going to say that. Now for my videos, you might know that action is one of my main themes because it's the only way to learn. I still look back at things that I was only dreaming about a few years ago, and I did it. I was scared at first, but I ended up doing it, and now I'm living in it, and it doesn't look so scary anymore, and I'm actually good at it. And how did I do that, you may ask? Well, it's not through overthinking. It's not through replaying it in my head over and over. It's through actually getting it done and failing, but doing it again until it works. And the great news is that you have 8 billion people to practice with. I'm joking, but pretty much. So honestly, strike up a random conversation. Your confidence will skyrocket and you will thank yourself for doing it. Go see the new student who's sitting alone at lunch and start talking to them. Go see that coworker who you've actually never spoken to and strike up a conversation with them. Go up to the barista and ask them 2 more questions than you usually would have. And trust me, those little efforts compound into getting an actual skill and actually getting good at selling yourself. Not in a pushy, manipulative way, but in a genuine way that actually helps you build stronger relationships, whatever their nature may be, and also get a stronger grasp of your own identity in the process. Because all those chapters I broke down, they're all equally important, but they must be mastered in that specific order. Because that is how you will truly become the most magnetic version of yourself. Because truth be told, magnetic people are not perfect. They're actually imperfect and they let their imperfections shine, but they are still so impossible to look away from. But that's because they are unapologetic about who they are. And people who are insecure and who keep trying to hide those imperfections and only show up the perfect facade, you can feel it. Everyone can feel it. They feel like something's off because the person doesn't let themselves just be. And those steps, especially taking action and repeating that action until you actually master the skill, that gives you the confidence to be magnetic, to show yourself in a more authentic way. Show who you are and say, well, that's who I am. Those things I can do, those things I cannot do, those things I tend to do but I know I shouldn't, but I'm working on it. That is confidence. That is being magnetic. I'm gonna give you one last little tip for the action chapter. Actually keep track of the evidence that you put yourself out there, that you put yourself out of your comfort zone. Because in the low moments, you'll remind yourself, I was brave enough to do that. Just take a little notebook and write down those interactions in a few lines and just describe what the interaction was like. And it will compound and you will see that it makes all the difference and it will improve your relationships in your life, all your relationships, but most importantly, your relationship with yourself. Now, I hope this masterclass helped you. I really enjoyed making it. I truly learned so much through implementing all those steps in my own interactions, because that's pretty much the process that I use. And I strongly hope it will help you too. You can follow me on TikTok and Instagram for more exclusive content, and I will see you in the next video.